Part of being a pilot, a former air traffic controller, and someone who plays video games is a curiosity about the flight functions of pretty much every game that features aircraft at all. Whether it's Call of Duty's shallow helicopter action, Battlefield 4's pretty decent airplane and excellent helicopter controls, or War Thunder's take on the different flight characteristics of a plethora of historic planes and helos, I'm just curious to see how game developers manage aircraft. Are the controls overly dumbed down? Are aerodynamic principles even relevant? What sort of experience are people playing the game getting as it relates to aviation? Red Wings Aces of the Sky caught my eye on Steam. It's a supposedly free-to-play game, and more on that in just a moment, that features World War I fighter action from a third-person perspective. The art definitely got my attention, but how is the flying? One of my litmus tests is rudder control. For those unfamiliar, the rudder is attached to the vertical stabilizer or the fin that sticks up from the back of most airplanes. It's a big flap that moves left and right and is controlled by the pilot's feet. It's how the pilot steers the plane on the ground and an important control input while flying to keep the tail of the airplane in alignment with the rest of the body. So I always want to know whether I can control the rudder, and therefore the yaw, of the aircraft independently of the roll, which is controlled by the flaps on the big wings, and pitch, which is controlled by the flaps on the smaller horizontal wings at the back of the plane. In Red Wings, nope. Like so many other flying games, there is no separate control for the rudder, whether using keyboard, gamepad, I use a PlayStation 4 controller, or joystick. This is particularly relevant since this is a World War I game where the rudder could be particularly helpful in getting an enemy off your tail. Another good test, can the aircraft stall or at least eventually not be able to climb anymore due to lack of power? Nope. As the saying goes, the sky's the limit even if you cut your throttle and aim the aircraft directly up. That's always a little disappointing, particularly when considering a dogfight. Being able to outclimb your enemy could be helpful, but when everyone could climb to the moon without consideration for aerodynamics, it removes a considerable portion of the fun and challenge. Ultimately, those are pretty nuanced details, to be fair. Probably not many people are hoping for independent rudder control and stall considerations in a game. However, and maybe I'm being naive here, I did expect to be able to do a loop. Not so. You can pull back on the stick and climb straight up, even with no throttle, until you reach the end of the mission area, but you absolutely cannot nose over into a loop. I'm not sure why that is, but it seems like a pretty glaring omission for a dogfighting game. It's also basically impossible to fly upside down or inverted. I understand this wouldn't have been a normal thing during World War I, but during a dogfight, it undoubtedly would have happened periodically. To be fair, the game turned barrel rolls into essentially a one-button attack. So perhaps there will be some sort of weaponized loop at some point. But that brings me back to the purported free-to-play nature. The only part that is free is a 4-mission demo that includes 3 airplanes. No problem, I'm okay with giving players a taste of the game, but advertising it as free-to-play just seems disingenuous. The game has a demo. The game is not free-to-play. Maybe I'm splitting hairs here, but I was pretty disappointed when I reached the end of mission number 4. Oh man, more on mission number 4 in a second. And was prompted to go buy the game if I wanted to continue. Sure, I could replay those 4 missions, but they weren't particularly entertaining. Mission number 4 is a real head-scratcher. You're returning to base with a leaking fuel tank, but you're not tasked with getting to base as soon as possible or even flying in any sort of straight line. Instead, you're supposed to take a twisting and turning path through the sky to collect a certain number of fuel refills. However, I can't help but feel that I needed most of those fuel refills just to reach the other fuel refills. If the goal was to get back to base before I ran out of fuel, I would have only needed 1 or 2 fuel refills to get from where I started on the map to where I ended. It was just an odd mission. It was a weird thing to feature as 25% of the playable missions in the demo, particularly since that was the mission immediately before the game stops you from continuing unless you buy the game. There were no G-forces, structural weaknesses, or any other sort of realistic-ish flight characteristics to mention. Ultimately, it wasn't very fulfilling from an aviator's perspective. The inability to loop and the weaponization of barrel rolls means your actual control over the aircraft aircraft is fairly limited. The final verdict from a pilot's perspective: execute a missed approach and go spend your time elsewhere. However, realism certainly isn't the point of the game, at least I hope it wasn't. The game is gorgeous, and the little bit of gameplay I did experience was pretty fun, but the lack of even basic flight abilities, such as a loop, is frustrating though. In addition, it's not free to play, and marketing it that way is like the FAA saying it did a thorough review of the Boeing 737 MAX emergency procedures after the first crash.